Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are a little bit thrown off this week from Hurricane Irma here in Florida, and so we are switching up and had an archive sent out on on Tuesday, what would have been typically Thursday's archive, and now are catching up with the live class for what would have been Tuesday. So, um, uh, hopefully, if you were in the path of Hurricane Irma, you are doing well, you and your family are safe, and you have power back on and are maybe returning to some bit of normalcy. We here in Central Florida have been doing a lot of that, and Full Sail included. Full Sail campus has been closed this entire week and will reopen on Monday. And with the campuses without power, and a lot of the students and staff in the area have been without power and internet for either a little while or still some continuing on. So things have been, at least here, thrown off a bit, but we want to maintain the online class and keep that going as smoothly as possible. So if you were affected by the hurricane and are able to reach out at this point and need any sort of, or have already reached out, we will certainly take into account any sort of deadlines and do extensions and all of that to make sure that everybody has ample opportunity for success in this class. If you have written me a message in the past couple of days and might not have responded with the same punctuality as previously, and I am working feverishly to get all caught up and will be caught up when we get into next week. So as we start next week. So that is our status for the class, and we do have a couple of submissions here for peer review. So as if this were our Tuesday live session, we have a couple of submissions for peer review, and then we will have a discussion of your new assignments coming up for week 3. So as of the end of week 2, you have finished out your first game project, 2D platformer. By the end of that week, you have composed all of the music for the game project. You have we've done a round of peer review on the original composition. You have the ability to update, make any changes to the composition. You also created all of the sound design for the game. You put it into the game to get it working, and tested everything out, and probably found either ran into some issues that you needed to clear up with your audio, or once you got it into the game and listened to everything, there were some updates and changes that you may have wanted to make, and so it's one of the purposes of the project is to really understand that it's not really until you get the music completed and you get the sound effects completed, you put them into the game, you test them out, that you really get the full picture. You have your intention of what you hope it to be, hope it will be, but once you get it in there, there's often some tweaks. It's, I don't know, 80-90% of the way there, but some changes and updates would put it over the edge. Or things just don't behave or perform like you expected them to. But anyway, you have the opportunity to make any changes to the music and sound effects. You get it into the game. Once you're happy with how everything is set up, then you will do a video capture to make sure that everything is documented and captured in that final video, both the video image and the audio, music, sound effects. You have a nice professional video capture to be able to show everything off. So now you have made it to that far and got this first project done, and heading into week 3 and 4, we are going to continue that same path, but for a new project and a new type of game. So we have 3 submissions here. Each one of them are the final 2D platformer game captures. So we will take a listen to each one of them, and so here are some of the things that we're listening for, some of the typical things that I like to point out and identify. You have final control of the mix. We've already listened to the music. You've gotten feedback and critique on your individual composition. And this would be the first time that we're hearing the sound effects, but it's also the first time that we're hearing both the music and sound effects together, which basically equals the final mix. So a couple of things to identify with the sound effects and the volume mix. There are typically 2 ways to think about your music and your sound effects and how they are blended together in this video capture. You typically, sound effects are louder than the music because they are often providing some sort of gameplay information about what's going on. What are you doing? How are you doing? Are you good or bad at your objective? Are you winning or losing? Or in 2D platformers specifically, it's the gunshot sound so that you know you're firing, the enemy death sound so that you know you hit, and they also fall off and you have an animation there. You know if you get hit. You know when you pick up a power-up, a lot of the sound effects are reacting to some action in the game and are a validation that you did that action. So sound effects are very important in a game mix. Dialogue is typically king, just like movies, games, the dialogue especially, and it's often categorized as important player dialogue, is at the top of the mix because that provides the story. The sound effects provides the information of exactly what's going on, and the music often sits in the lower or the bottom part of the mix as the emotional quality. How should the player feel about it? Is it action, or is it suspense, or is it have you won or lost? And it doesn't typically overpower the mix overall. So that is the traditional way to approach the volume mix. Typically, sound effects are a bit louder. However, there is a big specific purpose of this video, which is you are a music composition student. You created and composed the music for this game. Maybe that's the part that you actually want to show off the most. So you ultimately have control over the final mix. One thing that we point out is we do not want either side to completely bury the other. Certain things like the gunshot, which is often a loud, strong sound with a heavy or an intense attack or impact at the front, and it's just constantly there. The player, that's what they're doing in their game. They're constantly hitting the mouse button and firing off that weapon and racking up the points in the game. So that is a very constant sound that can very easily kind of bury the rest of the music mix. And while it's an important sound to gameplay, it's not necessarily an important sound that you need every single detail every single time, because I just need to know that I've fired it. I don't need to necessarily hear the crystal clear, perfect quality of that sound every single time. While your music, has change and development over time, we want to hear those changes and we want to hear the focus of the mix. So sometimes the sound effects can mask the music, especially with something like the gunshot. The other way around, music and really the rest of the sound effects can often bury the dialogue or the taunts and the vocalizations in this mix. So while the music might be strong and your gunshot's loud, whenever the character's calling out with some interesting dialogue, you have to really tune your ear to be able to hear it. So just considerations of the overall mix. As long as you are making a specific decision as to, I want the music louder than the sound effects, I want the sound effects louder than, or I want these sound effects louder than the music, make that decision, and you can balance your music and sound effects accordingly. Again, one of the best ways of doing that is combining them into the same session. Take the bounce, you can, take the bounce music, take the bounce sound effects, put them together in a blank session, or take your sound effects and put them into your music session, and then you can maybe make some changes, however you want to approach it. Since all you're doing is just overall gain of your level up or down, you can just kind of typically do that in the same session and balance everything and then bounce everything out. So that's your main consideration. We've already talked about the music, but we'll identify how it sounds in context with the sound effects and how well it works for this particular type of game. So those are the main things that we're looking for. The instructions of the project asked that the assignment be, I think it's below 60 seconds. And going forward, I think Angry Bots, it takes our next game, takes a little bit longer than 60 seconds to really demo. So I typically, somewhere in that realm, it looks like everybody pretty much nailed a minute. We got a minute and 30 seconds. So somewhere in there can definitely work and give enough time. What we don't want is something that's 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes long that, especially with a game like 2D platformer, you can knock out most of the sounds in like we said, less than 2 minutes, and the rest of it is just repetition. So I think those are most of the big things that I like to hit on before we start. Let's go ahead and let's check the volume here and try the first one.
Stupid aliens.
Excellent. All right. I think the music and sound design work very well together here. Let me turn this down a little bit. Oops. So I think that the gunshot versus the music works out pretty well, because you can hear it. You certainly know when it's fired off, but it's not overpowering the mix. I would like to hear more of the lines of dialogue, just more volume, more presence from those. I think you did a fun voice, and it works out very well. It's entertaining, so you should probably bring those up since they don't fire off all that often. The enemy death sounds that where'd it go? That one. There was another one that I was hearing. That. So there's at least, I don't know if it's all three of the enemy deaths, or at least one of them sounds like it's kind of cut off a little too soon, or I can hear the fade. It all depends on, those sound more like library recordings, so it might have been where you pulled it from, but you might want to extend, just have a little, make sure it doesn't get cut off so suddenly. The other good thing is that you demonstrated at least 2 passes through the game, right? So you die here and allows you to respawn. And I think you do it again over here. Yep. So that shows at least 2 passes. That's something else I should have pointed out earlier. Is, and this is good. You don't want to just play through one time. A lot of people play the game, or the video capture that they do shows them playing the game like a player would, where they're just trying to get a high score and not die. And if you go all the way through and only lose all your health once, then they're only going to hear one intro and one ending, and you did 3 times that overall. So you want to be able to show off as much as you can. So you want to be able to show off all of the different sounds as best as possible, which means triggering the death state also, so that you hear the endings and it restarts over again a couple of times. So watch out for that, but you went through 2 times, and that will work. So I think those were overall. I think the music works for the style of the game. It's not repetitive. One of the other things that I like to point out is that the sound effects and the music kind of gloss over any rough edges in either one of them, so that when you have the music plus the sound effects plus the graphics plus the interactivity of somebody playing the game, then their attention is drawn in many different directions. And so while last round, when we did peer review, we loaded up your WAV files into Logic and we went through them one by one, and I pointed out all the little tiny details. A lot of that stuff gets glossed over in the final product. Of course, you want to make each individual part as high quality and as thorough as possible, but certain things kind of work better together overall. So good job. I think all right, so music works, sound effects work, like gunshot doesn't really bury anything, but I would bring up the vocals. You went through a couple of times. Yeah, all right. I think that works. All right, let's try the next one here. That's all the volume I can get.
You beans are I'll put you. You beans eliminated. Bomb door. You beans are toast. I'll punish you. You bean eliminated.
Did that say you've been eliminated? That was awesome. And something about beans and toast. Oh, you beans are toast?
You beans.
I'm gonna have to find that.
I'll put you. You beans eliminated. Bomb door.
Anyway, I like those taunts. The entire mix seems low in volume and thin. So I don't know if it is an issue with the video capture or if like the sound design and the music. I do notice that the music is pretty sparse in its instrumentation. Like the intros, a synth, and then, okay, the drums come in, or the snare comes in. So missing the low end of the music. The music overall could have more density. I do notice that the intros and endings do not have drums, so it like the drummer just kind of starts and stops depending on what happens in the game. So you're going to want to use all the instrumentation all the way through, bass lines, harmonic instrumentation to support the melodic lead, those sorts of things. So I think the sound design works. It does sound a little thin, also, like that, the gunshot. I like the lines of dialogue. I think some of that stuff could be brought up overall. You do go through a couple times. That sound is really loud compared to everything else. And it has low end, and yeah, so that one sounds what I would consider more full range. And so you probably want to use that health pickup sound as your reference, all right? So this is loud enough. This is has enough low end and high end, and has enough frequency range in it that you want to match the other ones. The other thing you could do is reference some of the other student videos. Like just when I loaded these up, if I play this one. So if I take this to half volume, and then I play this one at half volume, this one's just a lot lower overall. So reference other things against your own mix while you have Logic open. Switch over to the peer review and watch somebody's video and just play them next to each other. And you want to be able to be heard and hear all the quality that was put into it. Right. What else? Music, sound effects, mix. You went through a couple of times, showed off a couple of passes there. Okay. Very good. And one more here. Excellent. I think the music is really catchy. I think the melodic lines, I like the way that the intros and endings very seamlessly transition into the melodic lead of the main loops. You go through and allow yourself to be pushed off there, and it comes to a nice strong ending, picks back up, and it drops back in. I would say that the sound effects mix is a bit low. Some of the sound effects come through, like pickups and some of the bomb sounds, but the taunts and the other vocalizations, I'm having a real hard time hearing. Sorry, and like the gunshot, I can make out because I can see it, and it's present enough that I can catch it quite often. But yeah, maybe again, just take your sound effects, or maybe since the music is more of the correct level, maybe just take your music bounce and put it into your sound effects, and then sound effect session and bounce them out again a little bit louder, because they are pretty evenly low. There's none of them that really stand out, which is actually a better thing typically, where then it's just like overall group, just take everything up a few dB. So I think the music works really well with the game. Like, I think there's some good sound design in there too, but it's just a little bit buried overall. I like intros and endings, and that you show off everything a few times. Everything's kind of nicely demonstrated in the video. All right, so great stuff to look at, and hopefully everybody had success in getting everything up and working in the game. And if you didn't, if you had any sort of issues, I really trying to think over the messages that I've addressed that I didn't see anything that was like, oh no, my computer's on fire, nothing's working, everything's going wrong. So typically, if all the files are formatted correctly and named properly, then things will work in the game. So the video captures, I think, are number one, that they are often become, the videos are greater than the sum of their parts. As I mentioned before, that if you listen to the music individually, if you listen to the sound effects individually, you could probably pick anything apart. But again, once you put the music in with the sound effects, with the graphics and the interactivity, it really kind of gives the whole view of what it's all about. So the music for a game is best demonstrated in the game. You could take your composition and piece it together in some way and just have the audio and upload it to SoundCloud and say, hey, imagine if you played this game, these parts would randomize and you'd have intros, loops, and endings, and it would be much more difficult to get the idea across of what your intentions are for the music. So having a video capture is the best way of showing off your music, or the best way of showing off your music is having your music in the game. However, having the game only creates some roadblocks and limitations to having people show off or check out your work. Number one, just having the game by itself means that somebody has to have a Mac computer in order to run it. And Apple is notorious for not supporting software or applications after updates and operating system changes. Things are get left behind sometimes. So there's no guarantee that in a day or year or 10 years from now that these games are going to work. I think it's still going to work tomorrow, but I don't know. The new Mac operating system comes out, and I always have to, or all of Full Sail has to react, because we don't know if our software is going to magically not work with every new operating system that Apple puts out. So having the game by itself is not the only solution. Another aspect would be distribution. If they have a Mac computer and can run the application, run the game, it doesn't mean that they're going to really trust some random application that they downloaded off the internet. Like if you put it up on your portfolio page, or you sent out an email and said, "Hey, check this out." A lot of very smart people aren't just going to download some random application and run it on their computer, even though it's completely trustworthy and you are an awesome person and everybody should trust you. When it comes to running applications on the internet, who knows? So a video capture is going to be the best way of showing everything off. Plus, you are giving them a guided tour. You are playing the game. You are showing off the things that you wanted to demonstrate. So those videos, keep a hold of those. We're constantly trying to add material for a demo reel or portfolio, and they'll be quite useful to you in the long run. So, all right, let me go ahead. We're going to turn it over to the archive now to discuss the new assignments for week 3. Please let me know if you have any questions going forward. And again, if you were affected by the hurricane storm, as we were in here in Central Florida, please reach out, obviously, when you can, when you have power and internet back. Or you can certainly call my desk phone, and we can address any sort of issues that might come up. All right. Thank you very much, and have a good day. So now that you have done the first round with our first project, 2D platformer, we will now go into the second 2 weeks and get into our second project. If I go here, there we go. So this is FSO, and here in week 3, you have the new Angry Bots composition with a series of videos that reference the composition in the preparation, recording, and composition of this type of project. A couple of different approaches to help you get started. Then we have a chiptune composition, where, since we're going to talk a bit about, we did talk about the history of music and technology and genres of music for games. I'm going to give you a bit of a taste of that with a particular composition here, where the main restriction is using the original limitations of the original Nintendo system. So we discussed that the NES had 4 basic waveform channels, and you're going to compose a composition using those same restrictions. So I'll discuss that here in a bit. And then we have the opportunity to submit next week for peer review. Had a few more people or different people submit this round, which is always excellent. We always want to encourage everybody, or as many people as possible, to participate, so we can get a variety of different projects there. And then the rest of we got the class and suggested reading material. So that's what we have in store. Let's discuss your project for this week. Our new game called Angry Bots. So as I mentioned, where'd it go? Hopefully you took the opportunity to download this week's game. Maybe you have played it and taken a chance to get a sense of what the game's about. Maybe took a look through the documentation. But a new game this week requires a new style of music and a new music soundtrack and new sound effects. Now that you've gone through the process once, you basically have the structure or the schedule for everything, and we're going to follow very much the same flow for Angry Bots, where this week you'll do the composition, next week you'll do all of the sound design, and you'll put it into the game and create a video capture. So This game, again, is called Angry Bots. It is made by Unity Games using the Unity game engine. We'll talk a bit more about that this week as we dive into some of the technology of getting your music to work actually in the game. And the Unity game engine is a very popular tool to make all sorts of different types of games. If you play a lot of mobile games, iOS and Android games, then more than likely you've played something that's been built on the Unity game engine. And Angry Bots here is a kind of a game demo where they, not only is it a game, but you can actually get access to all of the art and the music and the sound and the code and the program, like all the pieces of it. And so the people that were learning art can tear it apart on that side, and the people that are learning code and programming can tear apart a game project like this from that point of view. And we over here on the music and sound team are going to reference it and use it as a demo for showing off our music and sound. So this type of game, it's a much number one, it's a much more full and complete game. It does actually take like 5 or 10 minutes to get through from beginning to end. It does actually have an end. It is what might be considered a complete game level of a much larger game. It is kind of certainly a darker and grittier style overall. It's modern and kind of futuristic, a much more intense feel than 2D platformer from last round. It is having this sort of modern approach to the game, or kind of futuristic feel. You are this mercenary who's infiltrating the robot factory, and the robots are certainly not happy that you're there, and so they are there to take you out, and you're going to battle your way deeper and deeper into this factory. So there are battles that are constantly happening, and that's one of the main thing. Well, that is the main thing that we are directing our music from. The main musical idea that we're focused on in this composition is the idea of ambient and action. Our music is going to need to transition smoothly between ambient gameplay and action gameplay, where ambient doesn't refer, like, it's not a room tone or rain or anything. It's not like a sound effect ambience. It also doesn't mean the genre of ambient music, meaning that it's just like slow and drone and boring and doesn't move or change. Ambient just means less than action. There's no battle going on at that point. So this is often referred to as battle and exploration. So during exploration, you're just kind of wandering around. There's no bad guys around. All of a sudden, a robot jumps out or a bad guy jumps out, and the action music kicks in. And we have to be able to switch musically, seamlessly back and forth between a lower intensity ambient game state and a higher intensity action game state. Question here in the chat. Do you think a minor key signature would be appropriate for this game? Absolutely. For this, you're going for intense and battles and firefights and robots and explosions and heroic and adventure and all of these big and intense ideas. It's a lot easier to get away with that in a minor key. Even with some kind of diminished tonality to it, where it you can get that intensity and that tension from a minor key, versus with a major key, it's going to be, sometimes what I'll get in the music is it's like too laid back and chill or happy. That's the problem with a major key in this instance. Unless you're going for strictly heroic and I've already won and beat the game, then a major key can work a bit better. But sometimes what I get is, hey, maybe the robots aren't so bad with this music, or I get like happy dance party with the music, where it's upbeat and like a strong dance beat, but it's still like not too dark and intense, and like you have to imagine that these robots are chasing you with lasers and rocket launchers, and they are really mad that you're there, and certainly you're there to defeat them, and nobody's happy about it. So you want to avoid anything that's too slow or laid back or easy or happy or too silly or anything like that. You want to make sure that you're going for that tension, that intensity, that aggressiveness, that action feel as you go back and forth. So let me switch over real quick to the PDF. Where is that? When you not only do you get the video here and the game, you get a PDF that looks like this. And let me go through a couple of things, and I'll talk about the actual WAV files and the delivery and like what you're actually creating here. Game overview. It's going to talk a lot about ambient and action. This is really a summary of everything that I'm talking about here, where, and this is a very common approach in games. Angry Bots is known as a third-person shooter, which means most of the game you're battling some evil bad guy, and you've got either a laser or a machine. In this case, you're equipped with like a machine gun, and you are constantly going back and forth between moving through the level and actually engaging and battling with an enemy. Very, very common approach in games, and this is a challenge that a lot of games and a lot of game composers encounter. I have to quickly and musically go back and forth between lower intensity and higher intensity, and I have no clue when it's going to happen. So what we do is we create music at lower intensity and higher intensities, and we figure out a way to transition back and forth. So, and we'll talk about how that is going to work. How to play. Maybe you've already gotten a chance to play the game. Definitely take the chance, play the game, get a sense or a feel of it. If you're familiar with mouse and keyboard gaming, then WASD work, or you can use the arrow keys to move forward, back, left, and right. The mouse aims, and left click fires the weapon. Reference listening. There's a couple of different game soundtracks to reference in this sort of style. Musical style, high-end energy, over-the-top music production style, like fast electronic or epic metal. Big, loud, strong, intense music styles definitely help this composition, this project. So rock, metal, electronic, heavy orchestral, that type of instrumentation will work. Synths, large pads, driving bass lines, gated effects, sweeping filters, bouncing delays, fast percussion, heavy distorted guitars, big fast drums, large brass and strings, cymbal swells. All of those are just big, loud, strong, impactful instruments. So that is the main theme, the main aesthetic that we're going for. Music system, more about ambient and action, and I'll take you on a play-by-play here in a little bit. And also I got some examples to show off with screenshots and a bit of information about each one of the cues. And here at the asset list. All right, so ultimately what you will be delivering are 7 audio files, and they are an ambient loop that is going to be over a minute long. All of these are going to be 16-bit 44.1 stereo files. Ambient loop, then 3 action loops. They're each going to be 8 bars. The ambient loop is heard when you are not battling with one of the robots. the action cues are heard when you are battling with one of the robots. And there are 3 different types of robots. Each gets their own individual action theme. Those action themes are only 8 bars. You might have noticed in the video that the battles are really quite short. You don't have to, it doesn't really take all that long to actually defeat one of these robots. So you want to make sure that the music doesn't constantly jump in and jump out and on and off. So we'll have to address that aspect of it. But the 8 bars, most of the battles are not going to even make it through 8 bars of music. Or even if it just loops one time, that'll take up most of the battles. So beyond, these are the main 4 pieces of music that's mostly going to be heard. Music stingers. The stingers are there. Notice that they're really short, only 1 to 3 seconds, and they are strong, sharp impacts that are meant to hide the transition between ambient and action. So let me take a moment here. Let me go back to the video and give you the play-by-play of how this is going to work. Actually, let me take one quick pause here before we get into this and let the video roll. Let me know if you have any questions so far. Okay. Let me back this up here. So, I'm going to start talking about the ambient and the action cues first. We have one ambient cue that is a minute long. It's the longest file because it's going to be heard most often. Then your 3 action cues, those are each 8 bars long, and those happen when the battles happen. So let's talk about how the game knows how to switch back and forth between these pieces of music. If nothing else is happening, and from the start of the game, you hear the ambient cue. If the player just finds a corner and just stands there forever, they are going to hear that ambient cue. Here in the chat, how long can we go on with the ambient music? The cue is supposed to be 1 minute to 2 minutes long. I have some examples, and I'll kind of discuss more of the content and what they might sound like here in a bit. The ambient, so if nothing else is happening, they're going to hear that ambient cue. So that's why it's so long. If they just stand around doing nothing, it's just going to keep going around and around. So then, how does the game know when to switch to action? And then how does the game know when to switch back to ambient? And we said that the action music is heard during the battles. So then how does the game know when the battles are happening? So let's go through this. So the ambient cue plays. This robot here is called the buzzer bot. And it's kind of like flies around, and it's meant to be like annoying, I think, and zaps you. It has this laser, like a lightning bolt that comes out, shoots out right there, and zaps you, and just kind of flies around. It doesn't take much to defeat it, and it would just kind of keep flying around and keep zapping you. So this is a battle, right? As soon as as soon as it zaps you and you fire it at it, there's some battle going on. So we need to have the game know that that's happening. So the real answer here is that the game uses health points in the game to determine when the battles start and stop. So your character has health points, and the enemy robot has health points. You have a whole lot more health points than any one robot. So it takes a lot of hits on you constantly all the way through the level to do much damage. But for a robot, it really doesn't have much damage or much health points, so it doesn't take all that much to defeat it. So as soon as somebody loses health points, the game is going to switch from ambient to action. So the game always knows which characters are on screen. It knows which robots are there, and it knows where your character is. So as soon as somebody takes damage, as soon as you get zapped here, the game says, oh, the main player has taken damage, so that must mean the battle has started. So we are going to switch from ambient over to action. And this happens immediately. It hard cuts from one to the next. And you are not guaranteed in where you are going to be in the ambient queue when this switch happens. So it's just going to hard cut from one to the next. And that works because you're in battle now. You just got lost health points. You just took damage. All right, now it's on. We're going to battle for a little bit. And then somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose, and the music will have to shift. So from the beginning of the game, the ambient queue is playing until somebody takes damage. And at that point, the action music starts. And then until at some point, somebody is at 0 health. Either your character, but more than likely it's one of the robots. So that robot now goes to 0 health, and the game knows that the battle is over. So it doesn't immediately hard cut back to the ambient queue. It's a strong change in intensity. Going from lower intensity ambient music to higher intensity action music works because it's kind of like when your friend jumps out around the corner and scares you, your heartbeat kind of just skyrockets. It like jumps up real quick and it's pounding suddenly, and your natural reaction is that your heartbeat can jump up very, very quickly. So the pace of the music can jump up quickly because now the battle has started. But when your friend jumps out and you realize, oh, it's just your friend and there's no danger, well, your heartbeat doesn't just drop back to where it was. You have to breathe a little bit and calm yourself down, and it returns back to where it was. So we're going to do the same thing with the music. Going from ambient into action, from lower intensity to higher intensity, we're just going to make a sudden jump up. But when the battle is over and you're going from high intensity to low intensity music, we're going to slowly crossfade over 3 seconds to return it back down to normal before the next battle starts. So ambient music is heard. Zap, now the action music instantly hard cuts. Battle is now over, and it crossfades out for 3 seconds. Next one. These are called spider bots, and they're basically like bombs on legs. They jump awake there, and they chase you. They don't have any attack until they get close enough, and then they just kind of explode. So same sort of thing here. When these guys jump awake like that, they kind of light up. You can see here, this guy jumps, just kind of like pops up. Then the action music immediately starts. With these guys, the battle music or the action music starts when they turn on or they wake up. So this spider action cue plays 8 bars. It loops around and around. Here it would probably play a little longer because I kind of just toy with it and dance around. But eventually, either you destroy it or it gets close enough and it self-destructs. So here's another one. As soon as this jumps awake, the spider action music would start. the battle goes until it's over, and then after 3 seconds, it fades back to the ambient cue. And then as the player progresses through and explores through the level, they're going to hear the ambient cue until the next robot, as this guy jumps awake, then it switches to the spider music instantly, battle's over, and over 3 seconds it fades back. This robot is called the Mech Bot, coming down the hallway here. It's sort of like a boss battle. A little bit more. It takes a little bit more to beat these guys. They're bigger and slower, and they cause more damage. So typically, this is going to be the biggest, strongest part of your composition. These guys are going to be big and have big percussion and drums and strong bass lines and loud, rhythmic, powerful music. With this composition, you can have more variation in the instruments than you did in 2D platformer. When we talked about 2D platformer, we said that all of the cues need to have similar instrumentation so that it seems consistent and almost invisible as it jumps from one to the next. With this one, you should have more change and variation in the instruments that you choose from your spider action cue and your buzzer action cue and your mech action cue. You should have instrumentation that represents each one of these robots. So even if it's not on screen yet, you still can hear it and you know which one's coming for you. So your choice of instruments will match the overall approach or style of that particular robot. So let's listen to some examples here. And I will also talk about the stingers. All right, let's see if this works. So what I have here, these are 4 student submissions. This first column over here are ambient cues. They're about a minute long, minute to 2 minutes, and they are set up or meant to loop. Over here I have action cues. These are each 8 bars long, and each cue represents its own robot. So the instruments and the melodic theme and the rhythms should sort of reflect the feel of that particular robot coming after you. And over here, these are stingers. I'm going to talk a bit more about these as we listen to them and figure out what their use is. So we'll start here with the first ambient cue. So it starts out as just a kind of a pad or a drone, which it shouldn't just be a pad or drone all the way through. There needs to be a bit of rhythm, maybe even a melodic theme or idea, and there needs to be change in the instrumentation. Here comes a strong change. So sometimes I discuss the ambient cue could be thought of more like musical sound design. There is a couple of ways to approach it. You could go with something that is more traditional composition, where you have drums, bass, harmony, and melody, and use and develop those ideas over the minute cue. Or you could use it as more texture and tones, taking more of a musical sound design approach. So it is using musical instruments, using synths, using effects and processing to create more of an interesting soundscape overall, that might include or probably should include a bit of rhythm. Do you have having a little bit of percussion or rhythm in there foreshadows the pace that you have coming up in the action cues. So change and development, one of the biggest things that I find when grading these is that the instrumentation, once it's established in the ambient cue, doesn't really change all that much. So you want to make sure that you have variation and development over the course of the cue. With the action loops, or the action cues, these are set up to loop. They are 8 bars. They need to be strong and intense. One of the main things we're listening for compositionally is making sure that the action cues are the loudest and strongest portion of your mix. However big and loud and strong you make the ambient cue, your action cues just need to be even bigger and louder and stronger. So typically full drum kit or strong kick snare pattern, a memorable lead that is recognizable for that particular robot, powerful bass lines. Intensity is the main thing that we're listening for. So here are, we have one 8-bar cue for the buzzer cue, we have one for the mech, and we have one for spider. Set up to loop. There should be some variation and difference between the first 4 bars and the second 4 bars. You'll hear this mech cue has different instrumentation. Kind of represents a different feel for the cue. Third one here, spider. So you can hear that each one has its own rhythm. It has its own melodic and harmonic and strong bass instrumentation. So these are going to create a particular voice or theme for that robot. And making sure as we go back and forth, you are probably best to maintain a similar key as you switch back and forth between the ambient and all 3 action cues. That way there isn't a strong harmonic jump between the 2 cues, especially as you're kind of going back and forth pretty quickly. You typically want to maintain a similar tempo through all of the cues, but use double time and half time to create variations in the rhythm. So in your action cues, let's see, this buzzer cue is more of what I would consider the bass tempo of everything. Then the mech has more of a halftime feel because it's a bigger robot, stronger, kind of lumbering around. Well, they're actually at a similar tempo and feel, but they both have a halftime feel. Then with the spider cue, it's got more of a double time feel. Sitting on those 8th notes because it kind of matches like the skittering feet of the spider bot as it roams the level. So using things like halftime and double time can definitely help create the intensity change as you move back and forth. in the chat here, I would like to create more of a soundscape for the ambient cue, but I'm not very good at composing electronic music styles. Do you think there's a way to go between electronic sounds for the ambience and orchestral for the action? I might actually go for orchestral for the ambient because you have more time to develop melodic and harmonic ideas. And then with the action cues, since they're short and meant to be much more intense and a little bit kind of techy and robotic, switching over to action for those, especially since you may not feel as comfortable with the action or with the electronic side of things. So, yeah, the answer is yes. You can go, well, I wouldn't say entirely go back and forth. Probably a better way of approaching is, let's say you do most kind of more of an electronic feel for the ambient cue, have some strain of orchestral instrument, maybe a cello or some brass risers or something in the ambient cue that's then much more focused in the action cue, and the same both ways. So whichever order you choose the different genres, then have an instrument or a layer of each one of them in the other ones so that it's not just such a strong difference between them. So, all right. Yeah, I would think those would be good approaches for that. Now, I want to talk about the stinger cues and their use here. Two issues with how the music is going to switch by itself. As I mentioned, when we go from ambient to action, it is a hard cut. So I'm going to fake all of this and set this up in Logic here. So let's say we were rolling through our ambient cue, and then a buzzer bot came out to attack, and we are going to hard cut from one to the next. Let me just make sure that that's somewhat lined up. It's going to hard cut from ambient over to action. You know what? I'm just going to do it all on the same track. So I'm going to just drag these around. It's going to hard cut from ambient over to action. And then when action is done, it is going to crossfade back into ambient. So let me create a crossfade here. Something like that. Now the game, of course, is going to do this way better than I am, just clicking around here in Logic. But general idea is ambient loop plays, buzzer bot jumps. The battle starts with the buzzer bot. It hard cuts from one to the next. You beat the buzzer bot. It crossfades out over 3 seconds and fades in over 3 seconds back to the ambient loop. I have no idea if that's actually 3 seconds, but hopefully we can get the idea here. So I think here's the ambient cue. And it's going to hard cut over to the buzzer. And the battle's over, and it's going to crossfade back to ambient. And goes back to ambient and allows the whole process to start all over again. So one thing you might notice is that change and transition in the buzzer cue is very sudden. And so having some instrumentation of the ambient cue also present in the action cues helps that transition a little bit. But the stingers also help that quite a bit. So the stingers are going to sit here. Go off the fade tool. they're going to sit right, oh my goodness, I lost it. Right where the action cue comes in. And they are there to help this transition so that it isn't so sudden. It kind of takes attention, distracts, and says, hey, look over here, listen to this real quick while I switch from one to the next. And it also provides randomness and variation. Every time you battle one of the buzzer bots, you are going to hear that exact same buzzer bot action cue. But each time it's going to randomly choose one of 3 stingers to play at the front to create some variation, some randomization. So let's try this. I don't even know if this is going to work or sound correct, but whatever. We'll see what it sounds like. And it sounds very, very quiet. That's what it sounds like. So it provides a little variation there, so that it creates distraction, and there's change every single time one of these plays. Yeah. So you got that. You got one there. Got one there. This is less than exciting. This one's kind of less than exciting. This one works very well. So a stinger should be a short, sharp impact that using musical instrumentation. It should not have anything rhythmic or harmonic or melodic, because that can run the issue of clashing with the action cues. So you want to make sure that it hits really hard and then gets out of the way very quickly. Here's some other stingers. This is a bad example of a stinger. Right? That's just like a short 90s orchestra hit. That one works all right. I would say that is the most basic form of a stinger, which is like a big bass drum or kick drum and a cymbal crash. And it's more of like a sound effect. Every once in a while I'll hear sound effects. You got to watch out for that. Let's see how well these work. These work well. These are more like, if you're familiar with EDM drops, big builds and impacts with kicks and cymbal crashes and turnarounds, there should be, those are very good kind of templates for this kind of sound. They should not be a musical phrase like this. This is another bad example. So musical phrases that have rhythm and tone to them are just going to cause issue when they're played against the action cues. So something that's quick, something that has a sharp, strong impact at the front, something typically with a big bass hit or bass drop in it, something with often a cymbal crash works, and then some cool modulating sound that either kind of twists and turns or gates or stutters or there's all sorts of fun effects that you can use right along with it. So stingers, again, are there to cause distraction and create some variation in the playback of your music. Let me try some other ones here. So here is an ambient cue. This one's more like what I would consider a traditional composition, with progression and melody, rhythm, and changes throughout the cue. And then there is, here's the action cues. So you make sure that it brings up the intensity and pace of the music. So hopefully these are going to be giving you some good ideas and direction for this composition, and ways that you might head. Other ideas here. Make sure your composition matches the genre of the game. Again, it's much more of a stylistic approach than 2D platformer. We did leave 2D platformer a bit more wide open to your compositional approach to it. So this make sure you match the style and feel. Ambient and action need to transition immediately. So keeping the same rhythm, key, and similar instrumentation between both helps that process. Action transitions back to ambient after 3 seconds. You don't know when anything is going to be triggered, so watch out for timing differences, tempo changes, time signature changes. All of that cause just rhythmic hardships in your composition. Most of the rest of that is stuff that is pretty standard. Okay, so take a look through the PDF, watch the video, play the game, start getting some compositional ideas together. And I failed to mention, actually, let me go back to FSO here. I didn't even talk about the fact that none of this is actually due this Sunday. We have spring break next weekend. So I'm sure we're all going to the beach and partying all the time. And no, I'm sure you're at home practicing your scales and your chord progressions and being a good student. Whatever you end up doing on spring break, or maybe just sleeping, whatever. Then you don't actually have your homework due this Sunday. It is due the 23rd, the Sunday after spring break. So also no class next week. We will meet back up in week 4, but that did just the schedule did remind me that we don't have anything due directly this week. So maybe you work on this for a little while, and you also work on our other composition for this week, your chiptune composition. So as I mentioned, we talked a bit about the history of game consoles and different music genres, the technology and the music and the capabilities of games over the different decades. And you're already getting a feel for what it's like to compose for modern games and modern styles. But to give you a sense of where we are at now, we're going to go all the way back to where this began, so you can see what some of the ideas and challenges that they were dealing with then even are still some of the same challenges we deal with today. But you are going to compose in the style of what is commonly known as 8-bit chiptune music, or also sometimes known as Nintendo music because it sounds very much or very much in the style and limitations of the original Nintendo system. So in our discussion last week, we said that most of the melody and harmony and rhythm of these original Nintendo soundtracks were created with 4 basic waveforms. There was a 5th sample channel that was used, but most of that was also can be used for sound effects. So a lot of the melody and harmony and rhythm was done with these 4 basic channels, and those are 2 pulse wave channels or square waves, 1 triangle channel which was mostly for bass, and 1 noise channel, that white noise channel, that was for percussion. So provided with this assignment, you get the PDF that kind of outlines everything. But provided with this assignment, you get a logic session that has everything that you need to work on this composition. And so mainly we're concerned with the restrictions, like composing within the restrictions of the original Nintendo. So you only have 4 simultaneous sounds. These 4 channels each have an EXS24 loaded up on them, and in that EXS24 there are sound banks that have sounds and waveforms pulled from the original Nintendo system and the Famicom system, which was the earlier version of the Nintendo in Japan. So you listen through these and you'll probably hear some very, very familiar types of sounds that you can use for your composition. So those sound banks are loaded up across tracks 1, 2, 3, and 4. So you are limited to only 4 tracks at any one time. Now, that means you can have more than 4 tracks, but only 4 ever play at once. So we've easily had people with compositions that are 10s and 20 tracks deep that are just constantly switching between different layers. So, and the original Nintendo could do this. It only could play 4 sounds simultaneously, but it could switch between the timbre or the tone of those sounds very, very quickly. So we have those loaded up. So how you use those 4 channels is up to you. Another requirement of this project is you have to have drums, you have to have a melody, and you have to change the sound or the tone of that lead melody at some point in the composition. So you need to have drums, you need to have melody. That means you have 2 channels left. That means you can have drums, bass, harmony, melody. You could have drums, bass, melody, counter melody. You could have drums, harmony, melody, melody. Just there's all sorts of fun combinations. So what instruments you choose, up to you, with the limitation or with the restriction. You have to have drums, you have to have melody. Then what else? What other? You can change your lead sound. You can have multiple sounds, but only 4 at any one time. When we started this composition, when we started this project, I was kind of worried about the quality of the compositions because the sounds are so bad, quote unquote bad, that that it would end up sounding like I don't know, like Fisher Price music or something really cheesy overall. And I found that compositionally, these are some of the best projects because this, again, since the sounds are so bad, you are kind of focused on using harmony and melody to create more interesting compositions. I think some of the maybe drawbacks of having almost endless choices in your DAW is a lot of people, they spend a lot of time when they're starting to write music just switching between sounds, switching between presets, trying to find a cool and interesting sound. And once they find that sound, then they write a melody around whatever that sound is, versus the other way around, of writing a melody first, compositionally, and then determining what sound you actually want it to sound like. Well, in this composition, the sounds are so bad that's not really much of the concern. So you're focused so much more on harmony and melody, you end up getting some pretty strong results. So I have a couple of examples here that I want to play, and somewhere. I think this is going to work. I may not have complete volume control, but here, these are all student submissions from this composition. Now, these are some of the best, but this just shows you where this can go overall. Oh, hold on, I don't think I have. I want more volume control. Hold on. Let's try this. Down a little bit. Now. Especially a part like this. So, lots of movement.